Hey lads, welcome to a boss healing guide for the last boss in Ruby Life Pools, Kyrakka and Erkhard from a Restoration Shaman point of view. Keep in mind that I probably didn't play perfect, it is a very hard fight, I think it's still overtuned a little bit, but let's go through the mechanics and what's going to happen nevertheless. We start in phase 1 where Erkhard Stormvein is on the ground and the dragon is going to be flying up and then landing every now and then. Once the dragon lands, as you can see, he's casting this big fire frontal, which obviously you need to avoid. At the same time, Erkhart is going to do two mechanics. The first one is called Storm Slam. That's the tank buster, which does a mix of physical and nature damage. It also leaves a debuff on the tank, which increases the nature damage taken by 100%. So basically you want to dispel that every time it happens, so the next tank buster actually doesn't deal much more nature damage. The next mechanic also comes from Erkhart and it's called Interrupting Cloudburst, which is a cast that goes off. It is not interruptible, the higher the key the more damage it does, and if you're casting when it goes off, you will be interrupted for 2 seconds, so make sure you're not casting when that happens. So that's unavoidable AoE damage to your whole party, and the last mechanic that comes from Erkhart is called Winds of Change. After another short uninterruptible cast, winds are going to start blowing you off from one of the sides to the platform to the others. Now the direction is relatively important, as you're going to see in just a moment, and there are a bunch of weak auras that tell you where the first wind is coming from, where it's going, and then what is going to happen with the subsequent winds that follow in the fight. In this particular fight, the tank actually has a weak aura that announces where the next wind is coming from in the chat, which you don't see in this video. But it's probably a good idea to have one on your own in case that the tank doesn't have one available. And that brings us to the most important mechanic in the fight. When Kyrakka is in the air, she's going to cast a debuff on one of your party members called Flaming Embers. The debuff is also indicated by a flaming circle around the player themselves. And this is actually a nasty dot that's going to take down the player almost to death, and after it expires, it actually leaves fire patches on the ground. And those fire patches are actually affected by the Winds of Change cast by Erkhart. Those are all the mechanics that you're going to see in phase 1. Over here you can see that I stopped casting, so I'm not interrupted by the interrupted cloudburst. And immediately after that, I'm the one who gets the Flaming Embers. Now first, let's say that from a healing perspective, this is the worst that can happen to you. Cloudburst does damage to everyone, so it hits you, and after that you get this nasty dot, which is basically going to kill you if it happens right after the Cloudburst, and you don't heal yourself up quickly on a higher Tyrannical key. Unfortunately, there are moments in the fight where this is actually going to happen to multiple people, and it's unavoidable. So basically, in phase 1, you want to save as many cooldowns and as many skills as possible for the transition to phase 2, which is actually the nasty part of this fight. However, I would be no help to my party if I am dead, so I did panic here a little bit. I did pop my health stone and health potion, and I also used my ancestral shift. I think the potion would have been enough to save me, but I used a little bit more skills than I wanted to just to survive this part of the fight. I also dropped the fire patches on the ground, and what follows next is the Winds of Change, so let's talk a little bit about positioning now in phase 1. As I mentioned before, the winds are blowing you off the platform, but they are also blowing the fire patches on the ground. So knowing where the next wind is going to come from and where it's going, you can actually position yourself so the fire patches are blown off the platform. This is where the weak aura could be really useful, but because we also know that we probably are not going to play perfect, we are actually positioning ourselves over here between those 2 pillars when you enter the room, which is far from the far end of the platform where phase 2 is eventually going to start. In this particular case, I already made a small mistake because it would be better if I dropped the flames where we're standing right now, and then we could tank the boss on the right side of your screens instead of here, which would have blown the flames off the platform and we would have extra blank space on the ground. Generally, I know that there's a lot happening in this fight, but if you have the weak aura that shows you where the next winds are going to blow, you actually want to position yourself to where the arrow is pointing so that the flames are eventually blown off the platform. As you can see, not a big deal if you don't do that. As long as you stay in between those 2 pillars, you have plenty of space for phase 2 when the dragon eventually lands. Needless to say though, don't go into the flames at any point because this is putting another dot on you, and it's quite certain that it will probably kill you. So you saw I managed to heal through the Warlock, getting the Flame Embers. Here I get locked for 2 seconds because I was casting when the Cloud Burst went off, and then we get a bunch more winds blowing us. The Storm Strike on the tank is also something that I keep dispelling, and all of these things keep repeating. Here I get the Flaming Embers again. I'm trying to stack the fires close to the next ones. The next winds are coming from the far end of the platform and are blowing towards the entrance, so this is actually not a bad positioning. And this time I managed to keep myself up with a Riptide. As you can see, when you drop the flames, they don't go off immediately, so you have a split second which you can stay in to finish your cast and then move out of the fire. However, this time the mechanics are reversed. The Cloud Burst cast actually finishes right after I managed to heal myself up, so I die, I immediately yank, but this is why I say that this fight is a bit unfair. You're a shaman, you don't have Dream Bread to keep you alive at all times, so I wonder what I could have done here to keep myself alive, right? I already popped my Ancestral Guidance earlier, and I'm saving all of the other cooldowns for later in the fight when the phase 2 starts, because this is actually the scariest part that we haven't even gotten to yet. Anyway, another nasty Cloud Burst, more dispels. The tank actually gets the debuff here as well, but we are already at the transition to phase 2. That happens when one of the two, either Kyrakka or Erkhart, reaches 50% of their health. Now, there's a little trick here which my group actually exploited perfectly. If the dragon lands at, let's say, 51% and it starts casting its frontal, even if it goes below 50% while casting, it will finish its cast and then it will go and transition to phase 2. So this is exactly what we did. Of course, you want to DPS the dragon down first, and this is what we're saving all the cooldowns for. Actually, as you can see, I already popped a Bloodlust here, but I should have done it a little bit earlier when the dragon actually landed, so we get even more DPS into it before it goes into phase 2. And from this point on, it's a race. You have to kill the dragon before the dragon kills you. That's pretty much it. What happens next is, as you can see, the dragon always lands on that spot in the platform, which is why we elected to fight it on the other end of the boss area, so this is clean for phase 2 when it actually lands. The other thing that happens is that Mr. Erkhart actually mounts the dragon, and although you can still hit them separately and AoE them down, your priority, as said previously, is Kyrakka. You have to kill the dragon very, very quickly. Now, I don't know if this is avoidable, but every time he mounts the dragon, he casts the Cloud Burst. As you can see on the screen, the Cloud Burst already went off, so the Hunter and myself are 30% less health. And the very next thing that happens is the Flame Spit, which makes the dragon jump a little bit into the air, and then he's going to target not 1, but 3 people with the Flaming Embers. As you can see, in this case, the lucky winners are myself, the Warlock, and the Warrior, but this is where you are saving all of your cooldowns for. As you can see, I already popped my Healing Tide Totem, and I popped my Ascendant, so I'm trying to keep all 3 people alive, and of course, if you get the Flame debuff on you, you're going to drop the Fire Patches on the ground, so you need to be prepared to move away from that as well, where your Spirit Walker's Grace could actually be very useful. I did not pop it here, but I should have, because that would have helped tremendously. Now, let me say that we did not coordinate this very well here, but for the first Flame Spit, what you want to do is usually stack on top of each other and use the Spirit Link for when the 3 embers hit. This will mitigate the damage and it will also keep people topped up, but you have to spread very quickly after that, because if you're in somebody else's flame circle, you'll get extra damage and probably die. This will allow you to save Ascendance for the second set of Flame Spits, which is coming up shortly, and of course, whatever you can save from phase 1, you don't want to actually waste any cooldowns in phase 1, but if you need to keep people alive there, then don't hesitate to actually press a button. The more you have for phase 2, the easier it's actually going to be to get through that phase. Here, of course, with the Ascendance, there's no problem to keep everybody up. The rest of the mechanics still happen, so watch for the winds, dispel your tank, and then shortly after, the dragon is going to fly up again for another Flame Spit, and he's going to cast 3 more Fire Embers on you. Now, this is extremely nasty because you don't see Erkhart at the moment, but he is casting the Cloud Burst Interrupt, so first, don't get interrupted, and it's going to hit your party for a bunch of damage, which is going to make the healing of the Flame Spits even harder after that. Unluckily, we get the Flame Spits on the same people. I managed to survive with a Health Stone, and your goal here is not to top everybody up, but just pump enough heals into them for them to survive the Flame Spits, and then at this point here, you can actually top them up. But, of course, the rest of the mechanics are still happening, so you see the winds, you see the frontal from the dragon, and you see that I still have to dispel my tank from the Storm Strike. However, this is where you get a little bit of a breathing time to top everybody up because the dragon is going to fly up immediately and do one more set of flame spits shortly after. Also, don't be that scared from the winds unless they're like blowing you into the dragon's frontal or something like that. You can just slide with them and cast your chain heals or healing surges, as long as of course you're not standing in the fire. Now my warrior here makes a mistake and gets into the frontal, which puts a debuff on him, which is another actually flaming embers, but luckily at this point the dragon is dead. If your group is good, you're only going to get 2 sets of flame spits. If it's not, you might have to go to 3 or 4, which is going to be devastating of course, but that's why you want to push the dragon and kill him as quickly as possible. Now over here you see me getting pushed by the winds. I don't actually care about them as long as I'm not standing in the fire, and once you're left only with the Erkhart, the fight is basically over because you're not going to get any more flame spits or flame embers on the people, which means that the only outcoming damage that happens is the cloudburst, which could interrupt you, and God forbid if somebody walks into a fire or something like that. The other important thing here is clear thundering early, because if you get stunned, the fight is basically over, and it could be very tricky to find the people that you have to clear the thundering with if there are flame spits going, or you have to run through a fire or something like that. So here we go, that's it, that's the fight. It's very hard to heal, but generally what you want to do is keep everybody alive in phase 1 with as little cooldown as possible, and then once phase 2 happens, pop everything. I would suggest, if possible, use the Spirit Link first with Ancestral Guidance and let's say the Healing Tide Totem, and then save Ascendance for the second Flame Spits. Hopefully your group is good enough so you don't get a third set, which would be very hard to heal through. But again, if that happens, only try to pump enough heals in people so they survive the flame spit, and then you can top them up later before the next set actually happens. Watch for the cloudburst interrupts from Erkhart, and as long as you don't get silenced, it should be totally fine at the end. You can see the talents that I'm using over here. I didn't make a very good use of Downpour, but Cloudburst is actually pretty good, especially in phase 2 when you're healing so much. You can have the Cloudburst actually top up your group after you manage to make the people survive the initial flame spits. You should also probably take the Ankh talent for 8% more health, and actually Earth Elemental is going to be very good here because it is going to give you 30% more health, which you can pop in phase 2 and basically bump up your survivability. Lastly, you should also type in chat and tell your group, if you're in a pug of course, to use their defensive so when they get a flame spit in phase 2, and you can even assign and say use your personal defensives for the first or for the second set of flame spits when you know that you don't have Ascendance and you have to do a little bit more healing to keep everybody alive. At the end, it's not only up to you to keep everybody alive, of course they need to dodge the frontals, they need to dodge the fire on the ground, but luckily you get a good group and you manage to finish your Ruby life pools on a high Tyrannical key, and this guide managed to help you at least a little bit. More guides are coming up on the channel, so feel free to subscribe. Let me know if you have any preference for any of the bosses you haven't seen yet, and until then, happy healing and happy keying.